Today we're going to tie a pheasant tail nymph. Let's get started. We've got a nymph hook with a bead on there, and I've got my brown thread already attached to the hook, and I've worked it back to where the bend starts. And we're using, these are the fibers off of a pheasant tail, hence the name of the fly. So we'll tie these in to start with the tail of the fly right at the bend of the hook. I just put 1 or 2 loose wraps on there before I cinch it down, and that way I can manipulate the length of the tail and the position of it. That looks good to me, so I'm just going to put a little bit of tension on there and maybe 1 more wrap. And then I'm going to take this end right here and I'm going to pull it back and wrap that down. On this fly I'm going to put a gold ribbing. You don't have to, not an essential, but makes it, adds 1 more element of depth to the complexity of the fly. Just looks a little more appealing, and it also adds to the durability of the fly. So I've got some gold wire here, and this is a medium gold wire. I think maybe on this size of fly I'd almost prefer a small, but that's up to you. This won't be bad. So I'm going to position that right on the top of the hook shank and start lashing that down. Once I get it down on there, not tight but secure, I can move that with my fingers just to make sure that sits nice and straight right along the back of that hook shank. That looks good, and so now I'm going to just tighten it down a little bit and work my thread back all the way to where my pheasant tail is tied in. And it's kind of important to get it fairly secure, because when you start wrapping that, being that the wire is more stiff than the thread and the other fibers, it can move the body of the fly around a little bit. So I like to make sure that on a small fly like this, when I've got a wire element to it, that I make sure it's nice and secure. And that looks good to me. So now I'm going to go back to this tag end of pheasant fibers, and I'm going to use my hackle pliers here. You don't have to, your fingers will work, or your rotary vise, but I'm going to attach my hackle plier to those, and I'll hold it right here, and I'll use the rotary function on my vise also. We're going to use this to just build up the abdomen portion of a fly, is what this would be. I get to about where I want my thorax to start, and I'm going to work my thread back to where that is, and we're going to lash that down. I'll get rid of those hackle pliers, and then from here we're going to start wrapping the gold wire. I like to pay attention to how I'm spacing it out, each wrap one to another. I think that's one area where you can make your fly really look nice, if you make sure that that spacing is nice and even. So I've come up to where my other pheasant tail fibers left off and where my thorax is going to begin. Let me just position those back behind it, put the wire in front, and we're going to lash the wire down. Take up the slack on my thread. When you use the rotary vise, it will just automatically add wraps of thread as your thread sits idle while your vise is moving. And so I usually will back that up, just so I don't have excessive thread on the hook there. But now I'm lashing down that gold wire. It's secure now, and I'm going to trim it. Now in my with my tying tools, I've got 4 pairs of tweezers. I've got 2 fine pairs, and I've got 2 that are larger like this. And I use these large ones. You probably can't see, but on the fly where I trimmed that wire, the tag end of it is kind of sticking out. So I'll use these pliers to mash it down and to kind of bend it around the hook so that it sits nicer. And I'm going to put just a couple more wraps of thread over that to make sure that's all covered up nicely. And then we're going to go back to these pheasant fibers and do the same thing we did when we tied them in. We're going to first back up just a little bit and lash that down. And that's going to make it look nicer as we finish. Next material, we're going to use peacock herl for the thorax of the fly. On a really basic pheasant tail, you can use just the one single bunch of pheasant tail fibers that you started with. But I like to add a little bit of complexity to the fly. Mostly for me. I think a lot of stuff, a lot of times, things that look good to you don't actually matter to a fish. But on the other hand, I think peacock herl is a great material that looks really natural, looks really buggy. And then that may add to your fly as far as fishing it goes. So I've got that peacock herl secured down. I've got 2 strands of it. And I pulled these off of an eye of peacock feather. You can buy the strung packs of peacock. It doesn't matter. Either will work. So we're going to wrap this just like we did with the pheasant fibers. Doesn't take many wraps and you've got that built up. And then I'm going to secure that down. Put one more wrap on there and then trim it off. So now we're back to these pheasant tail fibers. They're sticking out right like that. They're sticking out like a wing. And you could even tie a pattern like that. I would trim them off, obviously not as long. But those could even function as a wing. But what I want them for, in this case, is a wing case. So obviously that looks like a nymph under the water, a mayfly that's progressing through its stages towards adulthood. And this will be the case that's covering up what is becoming the mayfly's wings. So you can see what that looks like. I'll turn that and kind of imagine that through a fish's eye, and that might look pretty tasty. Okay, so I'm gonna lash these down between my peacock herl and my bead. And since I'm getting to the point where my fly is going to be ending, I don't want to use an excessive amount of thread here. So I've got one wrap on there just to secure it down. And right from there, I'm going to go straight to my whip finish. I'm going to put just 2 wraps on there so that the knot is not very tight, and I can actually tighten it down right there. You can see those feathers kind of splaying out as I tighten it. And then I'm going to trim those off as close as I can to the bead head. Now hopefully your peacock herl is robust and splayed out enough under the tension that we put on it that it kind of covers up that space between the bead head and where the wing case was tied off in your thread, and it just makes it look a little bit nicer. I'm going to put one more knot with my whip finish and call that good. I'm going to put some hardhead cement on the top of this, and so when you do that, I'm not super concerned with my knots that I've finished with. Today I'm using the, let's see if I can get that in focus, the Loon Hardhead Finish Clear. I use that a lot. I use epoxy a lot. Just anything that's going to finish up hard. And that clear translucence of that, and it looks like a bubble, that really makes it look like, you know, a real bug that's, you know, preparing to become an adult and hatch. So we're going to put just a drop. I got a little much there, so I'm going to wipe one more dab off because I really want to control this. I don't want it to be sloppy. We're going to put one dab of this right on the wing case, and it can oh, and see, I wasn't paying attention because I'm filming here also, and I got it a little bit sloppy. Normally I wouldn't do that, but luckily for me, let me take this one out of the vise. I've got another one right here that I tied a few minutes ago to show you. So here's the finished product. Let me see if I can focus on that better. Maybe. I'm going to pull the vise out of the way. Okay, not working very good. Here's a finished product though.